Hello and good morning. My name is Megan Murphy. It is Monday, March 20th, and I'd like to welcome you to the Jumpstart this morning. For the next hour and a half, we will discuss Genesis R&D, and the purpose of this Jumpstart is to help you get up and running by helping you to learn the basics of Genesis R&D. And after this session, you should be able to create ingredients and recipes in Genesis R&D and ultimately begin to create labels. If you have any questions, we have colleagues on staff that will be able to answer your questions. There won't be any interaction with me, but on your GoToWebinar chat panel at the bottom, or on the GoToWebinar panel at the bottom, there is a chat feature that you could go in and ask any questions. So I'm going to start today with a background on ESHA research and where we came from and how we began, and go through what we offer today. So ESHA research was established in 1981 by Elizabeth Stewart Hands, and her goal was to provide a comprehensive nutrition database with the goal to use it for nutrition analysis. So at the time in 1981, there was nutrition information available, but not really in one complete place where you could go in and gather all the information. So she really had started that initiative to get that together. And now it's grown so that you can use this software to provide nutrition analysis and to use it for compliant labeling. And we have, ESHA has food formulation, labeling, and software, newly created restaurant menu and analysis to help with the upcoming menu restaurant regulations, supplement formulation and labeling software, nutrition diet analysis software, and consulting services. So what is Genesis R&D? It's food analysis and labeling software, and it was released in 1991. And the main goal is to create recipes, and the end goal is to create nutrition fact panels. But one of the great things about it is that once you get your ingredients and your recipes into the system, you can use it to do nutrient analysis. So you can look at each of your ingredients and you can look to see where your contributions are depending on what nutrients you're looking at. We also can look at nutrient content claims and pull in all your ingredient statement and allergen statements. So ESHA research, as I mentioned, has other software available to consumers for their nutrition needs. And we also do consulting services where, like today, you're undergoing this training. And we also can help with generating reports, help with recipe development. We have a staff on hand that can help with any label creation or label questions that you have. We also provide priority support, so included in the purchase of the program, you could ask how-to questions, you know, what we're going over today, how to create a label, eliminating footnotes, any technical issues or any database questions. Above and beyond, where if you're having any questions on regulatory advisement or more research, or like I mentioned, creating labels, then we do have a service for a fee where you could come to us and help us with and ask us to help you with any further questions. Where you can find us, ESHA is in 80% of the industry. You can find it in food manufacturing, beverage manufacturing, restaurants, supplements, supermarkets, universities and colleges, and hospitals, and so on. So it definitely is the industry standard for database software. And we have many users. So we're food scientists, dietitians, researchers, students, and chefs all use our software to help create their nutrition analysis. So our current database has over 72,000 foods and ingredients. We source that information from many reputable sources, government resources like the USDA, Health Canada, manufacturers, and restaurants. And we track over 160 nutritional components. So when we're in the system today, you'll be able to see all the nutrients that you'll be able to track in the system. We also have the addition of MyPlate food groups. So if you are needing to look at child nutrition, or if you're just looking to track how many servings of a fruit or a vegetable that you're having in your system, you can use MyPlate for that. And our database is continually updated for accuracy. So as we know, regulations are changing, and there are different nutrients that are required on the nutrition fact panel. So our team, as the information is available, our team is entering in this information in the database, and so it's available for use. So I'm going to switch over to Genesis. We're going to open that. I'm going to close this out. We'll go to Genesis. So hopefully you've had a chance to play around with it a little bit. But if you open it up, you have the option to either create new recipes, ingredients, and so on, or open. So it's really almost like a document-based system where you can open recipes, you can save as, and you can create your specific files for your use. So let's start with recipes, or I'm sorry, let's start with ingredients, because our end goal is your nutrition label. But to get to that nutrition label, we need to start at ingredients and enter in your data for your ingredient. Then you create your recipe, and then you can get to your nutrition fact panel. So we're going to click Open Ingredients, and that will open up a dialog box where you can search. And this is where you can either search the preloaded ingredient information that's in the system, or you can search for any ingredients that you have added yourself. So let's look for preloaded ingredients. So I'm going to just type in the word apple and click search so that we can see what all comes in the results of this search. So I'll just drag this open a little bit. And you can see on the left side, we have a column for the item name. So this search for the name or the word apple, and we pulled up apple. And then there's certain other fields that you can use, and it's helpful for you to identify the item that you're looking for. So if I click, I'm going to click sort on supplier, and then you can see where we have some branded food companies or restaurants, or even if you scroll down, you can see USDA. And like I mentioned, the database has also government databases entered in. So take some time to look through and to see what is in this database. One thing I do want to say is we'll talk a little bit more about search as we get further on into this presentation, but be mindful of how you are searching. So for example, if you wanted to search for a strawberry, I'm going to click search, and the system is going to search for the word that you typed in, which would be different from strawberries. So if we look here, and you can also sort by item name, so we'll go here. We can look down, and anything that has the word strawberry in it will come up in the search. But that would be different from if you search strawberries. So just make sure that you, as you are searching, if you're not finding what you're looking for as well, that, maybe trying a different form of the name, or even you can even minimize to just strawberry and then see what comes up so that you can find all you need. So let's open up I'm going to actually go to Apple, and we're going to look at one of our examples of a database item that we have loaded in the system. So as you can see, when I typed Apple, you have many choices that come through. And for example, you will see you have the choice of a fresh large apple, a medium apple, and a small apple, and so on. So I'm going to just open up a fresh, medium, 3-inch apple. I'm going to click select so that we can look at that. In this case, the source is from the USDA. You can see that because the source is actually preloaded in the system. And one thing to note is that with ESHA, any of the preloaded items in our ingredients have codes assigned to them. And so, for example, each has an ESHA code and each has a USDA code. This USDA code, you can actually search that, and there's a USDA nutrient data bank. And if you search for this number, for example, in that data bank, you would find this apple and the information for this apple. So that is where ESHA is sourcing the information. And that is a unique identifier so that the information can connect. So let's look through here. So we have the field at the top is your name, and that you could look at it as a database name, but it has the name Apple, so it identifies Apple, and then it gives a few descriptors. It's entered in on a 100-gram basis. And then as you can see, you have product and supplier. And after this example, I will go through and enter in our own, we'll create our own ingredient. And I'll go through all of these fields and how you can use them to your advantage. So if I go down to the left here, we'll look at the nutrients. And I will want to make this bigger. So you can see that the entry, we're entered in on a 100-gram basis, nutrients based on 100 grams. And then if you go down the list, this is all the information that has been loaded into this database. And in this case, it's the source is USDA. The USDA does a composite of different samples, for example, of this apple. It could be different growing seasons. It could be different areas of the country to come up with the most representative sample of this product. And this is where I mentioned that all the nutrition components that we track, so you can see if the information is available, ESHA will enter in and load up this information in the database. So you can see as I'm scrolling down, there are minerals with saturated fats and other nutrients. I'm going to keep going, the exchanges, and then my plate. So in this case, since this is a fruit, the USDA information and the cup equivalent for fruit for this 100-gram apple amount was entered in. And then once you pull it into your recipe, you can pull a report, and you can see once my finished recipe that has an apple in it, I can find out how much, according to the USDA My Plate, that this recipe is contributing. So the next is called yields and measures, and this is a way that you can associate your item with either a household measure. You can associate it with a portion. For example, this is 1 apple is equivalent or equal to 182 grams. And I'll just click the box here just so you can see the choices. You can also take your item, because you're entering, if it's entered in your ingredient as a weighted item, you can convert it with the density to a liquid measure. So we see milliliter here, or liter or gallon. And for example, you can see slice here. So if you have a weight, for example, for a slice of cheese, and you know a slice of cheese weighs 14 grams, when you pull that to your recipe, you have that information available. And we'll go through an example of that in a little bit. Okay, I'll close that out. You also have the ability to enter cost if you have a cost available for your product. And groups are also a very helpful way to organize your ingredients. There are many preloaded groups, and if the preloaded groups from ESHA are in black, if you entered in your own groups, they would be in blue. And groups are, they have a few functions. They help you organize your ingredients or your recipes, but then they also can help you further in your search. Your ingredient statement, so this is where you would have your ingredient statement name, for example, for your apple here. And you could enter in your final ingredient statement for this actual ingredient. And then allergens. The preloaded allergens in Genesis are all in black. And if you open this in your version of Genesis, any ingredient that you open or you create will always have the mandatory allergens checked. And this is for a prompt for you to go in and make sure that you make that designation, that you do that review of your ingredient statement or you do that review of your specific product and choose the ingredient, the most appropriate or the actual allergen that you need to choose. In this case, this is an apple. You would clear all the allergens so that you wouldn't need to show an allergen for this product. But this prompts you to go in yourself and to make this choice. So I'm going to go back to this ingredient home page. And one thing I'd like to mention is that these preloaded ingredients will, or if as information is available and as ESHA pushes software releases, there may be data updates. So for example, for this particular item, if the USDA updates the amount of fiber, if they have new data for fiber, ESHA would go in and make that adjustment as the USDA releases that information. And this ingredient may change. So this is for a decision for you to make in your company, because if you are using this ingredient and rolling it into a recipe, your nutrition fact panel may change. So if you want to keep this as your own and keep it as a point in time, then what you could do is you could save it and do a save as and create your own. So, and I want to show you how to do this, because if you do want to say, I'm using this apple and this is the data I have as of this date, as new data is released, I can update my recipe, but I will use the data as it is today. So I'm going to just update the name, and I'm going to put the USDA code in the name. And one thing that you to know is that every name in this database in Genesis R&D needs to be unique. So it will allow you to save if you have the same identical name in a different ingredient. So you want to make sure that you are using unique names for each of your ingredients, and it makes sense because you do want to make sure you keep that distinction between all of your ingredients. So in this case, I'm going to update the name with the USDA code 9003. I'm going to go File at the top, and I'm going to go to Save As. And it's going to ask me, you know, is this what you want to save? And I'll click Save. Ingredient was saved successfully. So all the information that was in this, you know, database ingredient is all there. One thing that changed, though, is that it zeroes out the ESHA code and the government code. And what this means is that now this is your ingredient. You're saving this in at this period of time. And then at the bottom of this page, what you can do is there's a note section that allows you to make any notes so that you can document what you're doing at any given time. And we have it available where you have a Notes 1 page, a Notes 2 tab, and a Notes 3. So if you do have more information that you would like to add, and you could put them in any tab. So for example, this Notes 1 is your entry notes. So I'll put in today's date, and I'll say USDA Apple code 9003 saved, and put my name. and then I'll go at the top, and I'll click Save. And one thing to note, that as you do make any changes, there's a little asterisk at the top, and that shows that this item hasn't been saved since the last time you made any changes. So once I click Save, so we'll save this ingredient. I'll get the prompt. Will let me know that it was saved, and the asterisk goes away. And then if you do add any, any other notes, like just put a period at the end, then that asterisk will pop up again. If you happen to click the X to close it out, it will also prompt you. It'll ask you, do you want to save your changes? So it's letting you know that you did make some changes, but you didn't save them. So then you can click yes, and then that will save your changes. And then it closed out the ingredient. So that, I'm going to go back and just open that ingredient again. So I'm going to go, let me go back. So since now it's an ingredient in the database, I will open ingredient and I'll type in apple. We'll see if I can find the one that I created. And I can see this right here. Apple Fresh Medium USDA 9003. There are settings where you can adjust the color of your database view. And in this case, any of the preloaded ingredients in the database are a light green, and my user created ingredients are a dark green. I'm going to click select, and it will open up my ingredient again. And again, as I mentioned, now that you've saved it over and that the ESHA code and the government code are set to 0, this is a static entry or a static database item, and it will not update as any other updates come through the database. So next I will go to, we're going to create our own ingredient. So in this case, I'm going to click New up at the top here and Ingredient. So the first thing you need to do is enter the name. And there's another asterisk here in this view, my name, quantity, and measure. These 3 items on this ingredient page are mandatory. And then if you look down here, you can see that it says optional. So if you are creating your own ingredient, these 3 items are mandatory. And this is helpful in the event that when this screen is open, you're not allowed to go anywhere else or open anything else. So you could type in a name and type in the quantity. And then if you wanted to go check on something, or if you had gotten, you need to switch and do something else, you can still have this shell of an ingredient created and then go and work on it later. So in this case, I'm going to enter in an ingredient that I have, and I'm going to call it pecans chopped. And I might add another name, comma, roasted chopped, because I may have a duplicate name somewhere out there in my database. So I want to make sure. And this is for your organization to discuss how you're going to name your items. So in this case, if you have many items that are, maybe a pecan salted or pecans roasted, it will help you to be consistent with how you're naming your items so that you can talk amongst yourselves if you do have more users, and it will just help you with the ease of locating all your information as well. So the next item that you enter in is your quantity. And in a lot of cases, you would enter in, if you were given a spec, and hopefully that most specs would come with the 100 gram in measure, which is typically the industry standard, an ingredient statement, allergen statement, and it may have other properties on that specification from wherever you're getting your item. Your entry is based on a weighted amount. So you have the choice of ounce weight, pound, gram, kilogram, and so on. And we know in some cases you may be getting your own, it may not be a spec with the full 100 gram information. It could be a nutrition fact panel where you're entering something in on a 28 gram basis. Make sure that you do look at that measure of when you're entering your nutrients, what is the basis of that measure? So in this case, I will enter in the 100 gram. And like I said, if you clicked OK, those are the mandatory fields that you have to enter. Then you could go and look, you could say, oh, did I enter this in before? Did I call it something else? And you could go in and access the database. So the next field is common name. So this is more of the name is your database name, and then your common name is an area where you can put in a more user-friendly or more consumer-friendly name. And this common name will roll up to your recipe and can roll up to your reports as well. So if you left the common name blank, this name pecan roasted is what's going to be pulled into your recipe. But say we want to enter in, we're going to call it pecans for now. And then that way we'll see that in the recipe. The next field is user code. User code, again, is a unique field where you cannot have any duplicate items. And user code is where you would make a decision within your company of, in some cases, it could be a product line number, it could be a menu item number, it could be an identifiable unique code for your product to enter in here. And this helps with identification, and it also helps with searching. So I'm just going to put numbers in here, but you could use letters and numbers or symbols and so on. So say you have a product line 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have a few different variations. You could also do a dash and do a number 2. The product is more of your branded information. So for example, this would be more of your product line. So say you had, you had bagels. So the product line would be onion bagels, but then you could put in your supplier as who's supplying. But this would be, so I'm just going to, and you can also, and look through, because we do have many preloaded product names, you could also put in your own product. So I'm going to call mine is Patty's Pecans, because that's my product line. And I will click OK. And there's that. The supplier, and in our example before, we saw USDA, because that's where the data was coming from. You may want to also use this field to put in where's supplier. So maybe my product line is Patty's Pecans, and I can search through and look to see if there's anything that's applicable that's already preloaded. Or I can put in, and I could just put ABC, not manufactured. So it's a useful tool for you to keep track, and it's documentation. It's keeping the information and keeping track of everything. And again, these fields are for you to be able to enter in the information. Now that we have the basics of your ingredient entered in, you can go to nutrients and start entering in your nutrients. So I'm going to drag this out a little bit so that we can see that. And one thing I want to show you is that you can either, right now, I have the checkbox click to show all nutrients. So you're going to see all the available nutrients in here. Or you can uncheck the box and just see the mandatory nutrients. In this case, I have my settings based on the new upcoming regulations, that what we're now calling 2016. So the new label standards are calling for added sugar, vitamin D, and potassium, which vitamin D and potassium were voluntary before, and added sugar was not required at all. And there are some label changes where previously in the previous nutrition factor panel, vitamin A and vitamin C were mandatory. Now they're voluntary. So you could minimize your list and add and just enter in your data for just those nutrients. Or you can click Show All Nutrients. And this will allow you to see all the nutrients in the database. It will give you all the fields that you can enter. And the way Genesis has created this system right now is that you can work with both labels. So right now we're kind of living in between where there are new regulations up on the horizon that companies will need to comply in 2018. But if you're still printing and using the data from your labels for the current and you're not ready to make that transition, you can still use the database for both, and you can still create your labels for both regulations. But this allows you to enter in the data so that you can make that switch when you're ready. So I'm going to begin entering in data, and you can just scroll down the line, enter in your information, and a lot of times you will hopefully have your information as far as your value. In some cases, if you are only supplied a nutrition fact panel, and this is most evident in, I'm going to just close this up so that we can do this here. This is most evident if you're given a nutrition fact panel, you're not given the actual value for calcium, but you're given a percent DV. So for example, say the label says 20% calcium, you could enter in the 20 in the percent DV column, and it will make that calculation for you. So I'm going to just go down and I'll enter in a few more nutrients as we go. So going down the line, and you can see that there are a lot of nutrients that are available to you. So for example, if you wanted to document the amount of starch, you could document the amount of starch. One thing I'd like to know is that for dietary fiber, for the new label, so for the 2016 regulations, the FDA came out with a new definition for fiber. And so if you are going to the 2016 label, you need to determine if you're dietary fiber or beneficial or not based on the FDA definition. And we do have webinars available on our website so that you could go back and look into this in more detail. But one thing to note is that we have a few dietary fiber fields to help you navigate those regulations. So these three fields here are for your previous regulations, or what we consider 1990, because previously, if you were entering in, if you had a fiber source in your formula, you could count it against your total dietary fiber. And you had the ability to have your total dietary fiber, but also you could document and put on your label what would be your soluble or your insoluble fiber. So as we go through, I'm going to enter in values for dietary fiber. And then if you scroll down a little bit, then we have fields for 2016 dietary fiber. And this is because you can prepare for the new regulations while also using current regulations. So in this case, what the FDA considers beneficial fiber is either naturally occurring, which would be whole foods like nuts, legumes, vegetables, and fruit, or approved, isolated, or synthetic fiber sources. And the FDA does have a list that they consider beneficial, and that would include pectin or guar gum or cellulose. Then what the FDA has is a definition of what they consider non-beneficial. So the non-beneficial fiber cannot be considered or added into your total dietary fiber. There is also a list, there's 26 fiber sources on this list that the FDA was reviewing. Currently, they're considered non-beneficial, and an example of one of those would be inulin, or what would be considered chicory root. So something like that in the past would be added to a product and be considered a fiber source and be added into the total fiber value on your nutrition fact panel. Well, now for this new regulation, the FDA is considering that not as a fiber and not against your total. So I'm going to just enter in both items, so you can use these fields together. And so if you did have a soluble source and an insoluble fiber source that was considered beneficial, you could enter in the values here. The fields for here, for other dietary fiber sources, are those sources that aren't considered fiber by the FDA. They're not going to add into your nutrition fact panel, but it's a place for you to document this information. As we go down, you will see total sugars. And then there's a field for added sugars, which is a new field. And in this case, we have roasted pecans, and there isn't anything added, no sugar added to that, so then we can add 0. So make sure that if you are prepping for the new regulations that you ask your suppliers for this new information to be available for you. So I'm going to scroll down, and I want to show you a feature that you can use in Genesis. So another thing that changed with, I'll go down to vitamin D, was that vitamin D used to be voluntary in the 1990 regulations, and when you reported vitamin D, if you did that voluntarily, the units were international units. Well, now that vitamin D is mandatory, the required units are micrograms. So we have it built into this where you could enter in your value, for example, for vitamin D, and the tool will help you make that calculation or conversion. So let's do this right now. So I'm going to enter in for 200 as just an example of vitamin D international units. And now I need to know, or I would like to, convert that to micrograms. So what I could do is click Calculate Nutrients, and I see a pop-up box that opens. And this will show you a list of nutrients that you're able to calculate based on if you've entered in a value. And from this case, I can see I have a line item for vitamin D micrograms, and it's showing me that what the conversion would be. So you would take international units and divide by 40. So I'm going to check this box, and I'm going to click Calculate. And what will happen, I'll put this here so you can see, we'll click Calculate, and I'll go back down to vitamin D, and you can see that the tool calculated vitamin D for you. So this is a nice tool in one of our most recent releases to also help you make those conversions as the regulations have changed and the needs have changed for reporting. So I'll just continue in and do just a few more because there are a few other features that I would like to show you in the tool. And one of these is the check data function. So if I click on check data right at the bottom here, this brings up a box that's a way to check your entered values based on a calculated value, or it will compare what you've entered in and seeing if everything matches up. And as we have it here, there's a 5% tolerance, and when this was created, this is sort of an industry standard for a tolerance. But you can see that we entered in a value for calories for 702 calories. And then based on the values, for example, for protein, carbs, and fat, the tool using the 4497 is making that calculation on that end to just kind of compare. It's like a sanity check to make sure that your information is entered in. So you can see that with the 5% tolerance, there's a 2% difference. And there are 6 different ways that calories could be calculated. And so there could be small variances depending on what your final number is. But this also can help you with, if I go up here, it's just another way to check to even make sure that your entry and if you're entering your information correctly. So for example, I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to enter in a different value for my calories, and you can see something is way off. And if I go back with that, then you can see that everything's green. And in this case, you can see that the total fat I entered was 69.97 grams. But based on, it's interpreting my missing values as 0. Based on only entering in saturated fat as 6.98 grams, it's notifying that something may be off. However, it's not saying that's incorrect because I may not have a value for mono and polyunsaturated fat. Because if you had a value for these 3 items, it would add up to the total fat. In this case, you could say, I don't know the value and I don't know if there's 0, so we're just going to check to make sure that there is, see what the tolerance is for that. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. This is where we were before, where you could enter in a value. So let's say I have 1 cup of pecans is 25 grams. I can enter that in. If I knew of a cost, I could enter in a cost of, maybe $12 per pound. And if you do enter in a cost, then if you do this for all your ingredients, then it will roll up into your recipes, and then you can see in your reports a recipe cost. We had mentioned groups in another in the past in a different ingredient, so you can also choose a group over here. Maybe I'll call this nuts and seeds. An ingredient statement. So in this case, this is a new ingredient. It's a blank slate in terms of ingredients. So I'm going to enter in pecans, and maybe I would want to put a little bit more, if there are more ingredients that make up this item, and maybe say that it's pecans and salt, and click OK. Now you may see a pop-up button because there may have been other ingredients with the same alternate name pecans. And you may want to use the name pecans for other ingredients as well. So maybe there's a pecans with garlic, and maybe it just has pecans and garlic powder, or so on. In this case, you can either choose to use the selected, or they're offering you a choice to say, there's another ingredient with the same name. Do you want to use that, or do you want to create new and just keep this for this ingredient? So I'm going to click Create New, and we'll leave that as unique to this ingredient. And then here is this where we can choose the allergens, and like I mentioned, all the allergens are going to be preloaded. So then I want to make sure that I'm choosing the right allergen. So I'm going to uncheck all the other items on this list and just keep tree nuts. And then I'll put my note, and we are at the end of this creating this ingredient. So I will put in created ingredient for pecans based 100 gram formation. And I will go up to home and click save. And the ingredient is saved successfully. So that's for entering ingredients. So now that you have an ingredient entered, you can start to create a recipe. So let's go to New Recipe, and we'll start building a recipe. And like the ingredients, you're going to start at your entry page, and you're going to create what your recipe is going to be. So I'm going to call this oatmeal spice cookies. And again, or actually I might do it this way, cookies, because if I'm a cookie manufacturer, I'm going to make sure I use a database name that begins with cookies. And I'm going to call this oatmeal spice. And then this, you can see that the serving size is where you can enter in how many servings a recipe makes, what your serving weighs, or you can put in, you can add a measure that would say, maybe I'll do 1 if this is a cookie, I could do 1 each. 1 piece is 28 grams. And this information will be reflected in your label. Again, you can enter in a common name, which would be pulled to your label. So oatmeal spice cookies. And a user code. And in this case, a good reminder is to not use a duplicate user code. The system will give you a message if you try to save a user code. So I'm going to just create a user code. And then again, you can use these product and supplier fields for however you want to use them. I'm going to click OK. And I can begin to load ingredients into my recipe. So search is similar to when you're searching in an ingredient. You want to put the name of your item in. So I'm going to search for flour, type in the name, and click search. And then I can see that I have choices, database choices. And sometimes I like to sort to see if I want to just go right to USDA, I can go right to USDA. Or if I have entered in a flour on my own, I can search for that flour. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose a flour and click select. So you just scroll down, click the item, click select, and then another box comes up. And it's nice because you can see up at the top, when I mentioned that you could enter in a yield and measure, you can see a yield and measure up at the top here. And I'm going to just type in, my recipe has 322 grams of flour. And I'll click OK. And let's look for the pecans that we had made before. So I'm going to search for pecans. And I have a few different items. I have a few that I've created in the past. But I can look here and I can see my identifiable characteristics. I have a name. I have the user code 1234, Patty's Pecans, and then the nut manufacturers. If I knew the user code, I'm going to type in and see if that comes up with the user code. That's the 1234 that I put in. And that's another feature of having a user code, is that 1234 was my user code and I didn't have to type in pecans. So it's just using this to your advantage to help you be nimble and keep up to date with all your information. So this is the pecans that I want to choose. And I'll put in my measure. And I'll put 100 grams of pecans. And so on. And that's how you can populate your recipe. In some cases, you can even add in a recipe in a recipe. So I had previously created a cookie spice blend, and if I want to look in it, so you can see, and in this case, my recipes are purple, I can highlight that, click preview, and I can look inside and I can see, I have this cookie spice blend. What's in my cookie spice blend? And I can see that I have cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and salt. So I'm like, okay, that looks like my cookie spice blend. I'm going to double click it. I'm going to enter it in and put a quantity. And here you have the choice. You can do gram, kilogram, liter, gallon, and so on. And you can also either use your mouse to click on this, or if I chose 9, if I went here, you can choose the number, and then that will also choose the measure for you. So I'm going to just go to gram here, and I want to show you what this looks like. So this was my cookie spice blend. It was a previously created recipe. But if I click this plus sign, then I can see what is in it. And I can see that based on the 6-gram measure that I entered in, then it appropriately distributes however much of this seasoning is in for each one. So what I'm going to do is show you also that there are other search tips that you can use while you're in recipe. And while we're looking at the recipe, there are other features at the top. So with search, you can search with just the name. You can do a nutrient search. You can search by user code. And in that case, to search user code, I had typed in the number in the search box, or you could choose F6, recipe only, name Inesha code, or USDA code. So there are more ways that you can search in here. So I'm going to close this out, and this is going to tell me, do you want to save this because you made changes, and I will save it. I'm going to open one that I've already created so that you can see a full recipe. So I'm going to choose this one. And you can see that this recipe has multiple ingredients in it. And we have brown sugar and flour and milk and so on. So let's go through, and we're going to go up to this Edit Recipe tab because I want to show you what all the features in your recipes that you can see. So you can either get to Edit Recipe through this button, or if you click Edit Recipe up at the top. So it brings us to our main page where we entered in, and I'm actually going to update this to oatmeal spice cookies. And there's a nutrient tab. So it pulled in, and then a little bit we're going to look at some of the reports where we see our nutrients, and we'll look at the label. But in this case, you can see the value. We have our 28-gram weight cookie that we had entered in the serving size on the original screen, one of the first screens. And we'll show you our data for unrounded data for this cookie. If there's any reason why you would need to override this information, you could type it in here. So for example, maybe you know that there's a vitamin that may degrade over time, or maybe it has a shelf life and you want to make sure that you want to make that change. Or if you had a new lab analysis of your finished product and you said, you know what, I want to change my vitamin D value to 2, you could do that too. And you could click override. And then that will be reflected in this right-hand column. This is just another way to edit your measure. When we went in, if you remember that we went in and I actually, on my original example, I had 1 each. So I'm going to change that back to 1 each. And it added that to 1 serving or 1 each. We have Brix calculations for those who are in the beverage industry. If they need to calculate the sugar content, there's an available place for this to be calculated. If there were any costs, or if you wanted to add an overall recipe cost, you could enter in a recipe cost. Again, you could put your recipe into a group. So in this case, I might want to put it into desserts. Compare to is when you get to reports, it's important. You could pull up a report and search the demographic that you want to, choose the demographic that you want to compare your nutrients to. Preparation method allows you to enter in any notes that you can pull into certain reports as well. Any preparation notes, any instructions. Nutrient content claims, we'll go briefly over nutrient content claims, but you could pull in a recipe as your reference recipe. So if you wanted to compare your item based on a standard reference recipe, you could pull in that recipe that you've created. This is another place to enter your notes. And then if you needed to add any HACCP notes, you could do so here. There are preloaded HACCP instructions. And again, this could also, if you clicked on one of these, clicked on that, clicked OK, it will be reflected in your recipe, and then it would go into your reports later. So again, this is a place where you could put in your notes, like we mentioned, entry notes. And as we go on the top, I'll go through a few more of these ribbons up at the top so that you know what the functions are for you in this recipe. So you could edit yields. So in this case, you can make yield adjustments of your recipe. You can adjust the moisture if you have any moisture loss or any target losses. You can make any changes for any fat losses, for example, if you're manufacturing something like bacon and you know what how much fat you're losing upon cooking. You want to reflect that final nutrient value. Or you can account for processing loss. So in this case, I want to go over doing a yield adjustment because I have a bakery item and I want to show that I have a loss, a moisture loss on my cookie. And this is something where you could use your notes to make sure you document that. So we're going to go through and I'm going to just type in before, the weight before baking is 32 grams. After bake weight is 28 grams. So if you remember, I had entered in that one serving or one piece was 28 grams. We started out with a 32-gram cookie. And that, subtracting that, you see that there's 4 grams of loss between 32 grams and 28 grams. So I'm going to account that for moisture loss. So then we need to find out how much moisture we're actually losing in the entire batch. So in this case, I would want to take, I have a value, my entire batch weighs 1,680 grams. So I'll go 1,680, and I'm going to divide by my pre-bake weight cookie so I can find out how many cookies are coming out of this batch recipe. And in this case, there's 52.5 cookies in the entire batch. And then because there's 52.5, but we're losing 4 grams of moisture in the cookie, we would want to take 52.5 and multiply it by 4. And then we find out that there's, based on this calculation, that we have 210 grams of moisture loss in this recipe. So then I can take that value and I can enter it into this field, and it will calculate my loss for me and adjust the nutrition. So I had figured in this whole batch there's 210 grams of moisture lost. And actually this will, up here, shows me my total moisture that I began with. So it's original moisture here. I'll click OK. And we're going to go over to the reports. And I'm going to show you how reports can help you with this, reflect this. So I typed down all those calculations, and this actually is what I had mentioned with analysis. So you can see every line item that is comprised of this recipe. So you have our cookie, and you have sugar, flour, so on, and then it proportions out or shows you each value for calories, protein, and so on. And so when I entered in, I'm going up to recipe here, and I had entered in that there were 210 grams of moisture loss in my whole batch, and I had made that calculation that there were 4 grams per cookie, then I can check and check my math, and the system will show you that it accounted for the loss and that there was a 4-gram loss in a serving. One thing that this spreadsheet tool can also show you is any missing values. So in some cases, especially with this new regulation coming forth where vitamin D is a newly required nutrient, some of this information hasn't been available yet. So we can see that in this previous entry that I had created that I didn't enter a value in for vitamin D, and maybe I didn't have it available, or maybe I had forgotten. But this is really important for you to know that you need to have all this information available and entered in order to have a compliant FDA label, because you don't want to create a nutrition fact panel with any missing data behind it, but this is a way that you can look and see any of these red dashes are going to show that there's some values missing underneath. So moving on, we'll go through, I'm going to close this report right here, and we're back to our recipe. And I'm going to go, before we get to our label, I want to look at my ingredient statement. So let's click on here, and we can bring up our ingredient statement. And this ingredient statement tab is going to show you all of your ingredients. And I know this recipe has a lot of ingredients, so you have to scroll down. This top tab is just showing you all the recipe items in here. It's going to show you the alternate name, which we saw in ingredients. And that's going to show you the alternate text, which is where you wanted to enter in your ingredient statement. Then you have this tool here that can show you by percent weight in your recipe of all your ingredients. So if you were at a point where you wanted to use the statement less than 2% of ingredients, this is where you could look and see what percentage in your recipe your ingredients are. And then at the bottom here, then you're able to see all of your ingredients. And this is really helpful because if we look here, for example, our ingredient with the most percentage or the highest percentage is our brown sugar. When we look at this ingredient statement, we're not going to want to have a compliant label that's going to say sugar brown packed. So you can go here and we can see that it gives you a high level look that shows that our item name, which was the name and the ingredient, was populated, but we didn't populate any other information. So you can right click this and edit, and I could put in brown sugar, and I wouldn't have, in this case I don't have an ingredient statement. I click OK, and then you can see that the brown sugar down here updated. And you can go in and do the same for any of your other items. Let's just right click butter and we'll take a look at that too. And then you can see you have our alternate name for butter. So that's what we're going to have in our ingredient statement down here. And then we have sweet cream and salt. And one thing you can do is if you wanted to, you may be able to merge some of your ingredients. So in this case, we have a few instances of salt. We have salt at the end here, and then we have salt in our cookie spice blend, and then we have salt in our butter. Now, if you have, in this case, if we go to our recipe that's in the recipe, if we wanted to click merge all, then we could merge in our instances of salt. And I'm going to go find that it kind of pulled out all your ingredients of your cookie spice blend and ground cinnamon, brown sugar, ground nutmeg, and salt. So there's only one instance of salt in this case. However, you will see that there is still salt in the butter here. And that's because when we entered in this ingredient statement, the ingredient has sweet cream and salt. It has salt, but we don't know at what percentage. So it's still keeping that salt together with the butter because we're not sure of what percentage it is. But if you're entering in line items of salt and the system's able to assign a percentage to it or know how much of it is in the recipe, then you're able to use to merge some of your ingredients. If you click edit here, there's a box that pulls up, and this shows that this is the ingredient statement that the program generated. But if you wanted to adjust it to your own needs, you could uncheck that. You can make changes, and then your changes would be reflected. Now keep in mind though, if you uncheck this box, this ingredient statement is going to stay as is. Because if you did end up making any adjustments in your recipe, it's not going to pull in a program generated ingredient statement because essentially you uncheck the box and this is a static ingredient statement. The next is allergen statement, and it's similar to where you can look on a recipe level view and see what your allergens are. So this is all your assigned recipe allergens and what your allergen statement would look like. And if you say, you know what, I don't think I have any shellfish in this item, I need to make sure I didn't leave it as an ingredient or as an allergen somewhere in my ingredients. And then this view down here is where you can do that. You can scroll through each of your item. You can say, well, my brown sugar, I actually left shellfish as an option. I want to take that out. And it's just another way for a high-level view, but then you can go into each of your recipes and make those adjustments. So let's get to the label. So we've looked at our ingredient statement, we looked at our allergen statement, we have our recipe created, and we're going to look at our nutrition fact panel. And right now you can see I'm actually on the new 2016 label. But if I go to this box here, I can open this view label, and then I can go to edit label, and I can make any changes to my settings. So in this case, Nutrition Facts is your 2016 new Nutrition Facts. You can see that vitamin D is reflected, total sugar is reflected. But you can go back and say, you know what, you can go back and forth and take a look, and you can save them, but you can say, I want to go look and see what the 1990 Nutrition Fact label looks like. And then you can see all the differences of, I have different formatting and different nutrients that were required. And here you can see vitamin A and vitamin C. So you can make those changes. You can also change your regulation. So if you do need to make labels for Canada or Mexico or European Union, you can make that adjustment. And if you make that change and you click the box, then all the settings will adjust to that specific region and those specific regulations. So I'll click the 2016, and then you have the choice of where you would like to go between your different labels. So in this case, you have a standard adult. You can also create a dual column, and this is if your product is between 200 and 3%, 100% of your rack. For example, like a bottle of soda, where the new requirements are you're labeling it as the serving of the rack, but then you also need to label it on the same package, the full serving, because according to the FDA, and most times you're consuming that bottle in one sitting. And then you can also change to different demographics for different labels. You can choose standard or vertical or tabular, so I'll choose tabular just so that you can see that it can make that change. You can go to linear as well. You can also go to the simplified format. So if you do have 8 of the mandatory nutrients that are at a minimal amount, you can also go simplified, and it will simplify your label. We'll do that just to see if there's some space saving. So then it will give you this notice, or it'll give you this footnote that's saying it's not a significant source of trans fat, and so on. You can adjust your serving size. So in this case, my serving size is going to be 1 cookie. And then you can enter in, and with these 3 dots, it's a field where you can pull up the box and enter in. I'm going to say there's 12 cookies in a container. I'm just going to say serving size is 12 and leave it at that. And then the system allows you to make any changes. And make sure that you do have knowledge of the regulations, because you want to make sure that you're making these changes as informed as being informed. But the system does allow you, where regulation allows, to make any adjustments. So you can change from serving size to serve size. You can also change servings for container for servings, and it will be adjusted here. So change that to 12 servings. Back to edit labels. In your general sessions, I'm going to go to format options. And in this case, there are some check boxes where you can say you can use unrounded values when calculating. I can hide the 449 calorie chart. I can always uppercase an ingredient statement. I can hide footnotes. Let's show bilingual and see what that looks like. And I'll show you bilingual. In this case, it's Spanish. If you chose Canada, you would have English and French. You can change your header for daily value to show either % daily value or % DV, and so on. So there's many ways that you can change the look of your nutrition fact panel through this edit label. Next is nutrient options, and this will allow you to go to each nutrient and make any adjustments that you would want to. So for example, you can display what either calories or total calories. You can change the rounding rules, and again, we're offering compliant options just to make sure that you're informed with making your choices. So if the calories are less than 5, you can either round to 5 or set to 0. You can also change the calorie calculation. So the default is to do total of all ingredients, so totaling carbohydrates, fat, and protein, or you can do through 449, and so on. So depending on what nutrient you're looking at, you can make any of those adjustments. You can also change your nutrients. So you can also add, if I wanted to, these are all your voluntary nutrients. So if I wanted to add back an item in, let's say we'll do vitamin A. I would like to add vitamin A into my label. You can click OK, and it will show a line item for vitamin A. And one thing I do want to remind you, though, that is we had looked at this database, the spreadsheet report, and saw that there are some missing values. The system will still calculate based on the information provided. So make sure that you are aware, too, that you do have some missing values, and and not that they're assumed as 0. So make sure you do fill in those items so that your label is populated properly. So we'll keep moving. Go back to edit label. And then the object properties are, you can change some of the fonts and the sizes if you would like to in any of these settings. If you want ingredient statement, allergen statement, there's some changes that you can make. And then these down here are for supplement facts. You do have the ability to create a supplement label in Genesis R&D, and these are some options that you can make with, format options that you can make for that. This is our nutrition fact panel. So there's a lot going on in this one. You can move things around. I can see that my notes are visible here. So you can right click and go to show. And I want to take my notes off because I don't really need to have my notes available. And you can make changes. You can export you can either export your specific nutrition fact panel to a clipboard. You can print it as a vector. You can do the same thing with your ingredient statement. You can export it as image or to a clipboard. Or you can take this whole label and you can move things around, and this label page, and you can export it as well. So then let's go up to, before we move on to reports, we'll just go to claims. And I had touched on a little bit of claims, but this box can show you any available claims you can make. So if the nutrient amounts in your serving adhere or meet any of these qualifying conditions, and we do have the citation for the Code of Federal Regulations and the rationale here, it will inform you that, for example, you can make a low sodium claim. Now just make sure that they're based on the United States, and make sure that you have your reference amount customarily consumed entered in, so you're making that appropriate comparison. You can click on sodium here, and it will show up in your reports, and it will show up here. Let me do my ingredients in here, and you can see low sodium. So then we're going to go to reports, and we can show all the things that you can see once you have your label created and once you have your ingredient statement. We looked at the spreadsheet report, and again, you can see line items for your spreadsheet report. These are all unrounded. Then you have a label rounded spreadsheet report where you can see all of your items, similar report, but everything label rounded. Multi-column allows you to view your data on a 100-gram basis, or you can even do unrounded on a per serving basis. And all of these reports here can be exported and saved. Go to single nutrient. You can choose a nutrient. In this case, protein is chosen, and you can see what the contributions are. So this can be helpful too if you wanted to look at, this, where the protein is coming from. In some cases, some people like to look at sodium to say, where's sodium coming from? Is there, and then maybe they can use this analysis to make any choices based on their formulation. Bar graph also can show you a view of, on your per serving basis, what are the contributions of your RDAs in a day. The calories and fat pie chart can show you what your contributions are. So for example, your macronutrients here. And the bar graph is similar. It's just another way that you can make the comparison and send the information. MyPlate, I had mentioned earlier that you can look at what your total recipe contribution is based on your MyPlate servings in a day. So in this case, the total recommendation for grains is a 6-ounce equivalent. And so this serving, this cookie serving, is providing almost a 1/2 ounce equivalent. So definitely very useful to have this information because it's adding it up for you. And with any of these reports, you can click on your report, you can go to home, you can do a print preview, and you can see the view and save it. You can print to PDF and share this information. Now there are other reports, are these blue reports, and these have a little bit of a different layout, but they're also very helpful. In this case, dairy density is a report that a lot of the dairy industry uses. And then you have some other displays. So we'll look at label display standard 1. So in this case, you have the name of your recipe, the number of servings, your batch weight, what the yield is, your nutrition fact panel, your ingredient statement, allergens. We have our content claim here, any of our notes. And all of these different reports have different features that you can use and maybe even different formats for you. This one is just a little bit of a different format where the the claim was moved over here to the side. And in this case, you're not allowed to print to PDF, but you can right-click on this report and you can export it. And you can export it as a Word document, you can export it as a PDF, and then you can save it for your use. So I'm going to click OK, and we'll just do this. I'll save this onto my desktop. And then if I go and look for it, I will open it up. And I'll bring it over here. And then this allows you to, if you wanted to make any changes, you can make any changes. You cannot make any changes to the nutrition fact panel, but if you wanted to make any changes, you'd be available to. Or you can lock it down and send it to you as a PDF. I'll close these down. And we'll go back up to our recipe. Now there is an export button up here, and you can, let me go back to our home recipe here, and you can export an analysis, which will export the data behind it, or you can export it as a recipe, and if you save it, export it and save it, pick somewhere to save it, then if you can share it with others. So you can create your recipe, you can have everything as you need it to be, and then if you have a coworker that has a version of Genesis, you want them to import it in, or if you have a client or a customer that you want to share with, then you can share this ESHA file with. You can email it to them, and then if they go to database, they can go to database and import, and then import that file, and it's really great for sharing information. So that is what will get you started with creating your ingredients, any recipes and labels. And hopefully if you had any questions, you have asked any questions. I'm going to go open the ESHA website just to go over some options that we have available to you. And you found this training most likely either through an email or through our website. So we do offer various training options. We do 2-day workshops in areas around the country. Some are, beginner workshops, some are advanced. We also offering menu restaurant labeling workshops coming up. The Jumpstart that you just experienced, we have web-based training and on-site training. And we also have services that we offer. So for example, I'd mentioned consulting services so that we can offer label development, we can do analysis of your ingredients, we can help with custom reports, and so on. And like I had mentioned too, if you did purchase the program, you do have priority support. And those would be any follow-up questions you had as of today, like how did I change the regulations, want to change the footnote and those, or even if you're having any technical issues that you can need help with. And if you do need help, you can we have the option for live chat, you can email us, you can click contact support, and you can enter in your name, your customer company number, company name. You could put a message in, and then any of these on the left, any of our support functions on the left will get back to you depending on what your question would be. We also, I had mentioned resources, and so when we had gone over Fiverr earlier, we have at least 4 webinars on Fiverr. So we have our archive webinars that you can click to either view the recording or download the slide deck. So actually our most recent on February 14th was a Fiverr webinar, and it just talked about any new news and the most updated information on the Fiverr regulations and how to use our software to comply. These are all available. We just have to click here and you'll enter in your email address and your information, and then they're free for you to use. Or you can sign up for a free webinar, and this is our list of what's coming up for free webinars. So we're going to talk about Canada, because Canada also has new regulations that will be in use in a few years that they need to be compliant to or compliant with. We also have a knowledge base that you can pull up FAQs, and some of these are either technical questions or they can be preference questions, or even just navigating through the software and how to use it. You can find out if anyone's asked that same question, or you can look for tutorials, instructional tutorials, and any documentation, any information on installation and updates. And then we have ebooks. That the newest ebook is for the new Canada regulations and so on. So there's just a lot of information, and of course you can contact us with any questions that you may have. So I hope this session was useful and helpful for you to get started with Genesis R&D. Please ask any questions as you may have, and if you think of it later, you can also email us, and definitely check out any of our upcoming training or any of our upcoming webinars that we will conduct in the future. Thank you so much, and have a good day.